Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central, and after kind of a tough day for the Bulls franchise yesterday, I thought what better time than to bring in special guest, our one and only Bulls beat writer for NBC Sports Chicago, co-host of the Bulls Talk podcast. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show, Casey Johnson. Casey, it's good to see you, and appreciate you making the time.
Thanks for having me, Jamal. What's up, man?
It's kind of, I've been better, as a Bulls fan. I've been a little bit better, but hopefully you got some answers for us that might make us a bit more at ease. But anyway, I'm sure most of you are already. If you're not, be sure to follow Casey at Casey J Hoop on Twitter. Be sure to check out all of his great work at NBCSportsChicago.com. He had to call him out last night, I believe, giving some insight on what's to come with this team after the inactive deadline that the Bulls had. I'll leave a link to that in the description in case you've missed it. Casey, we'll obviously talk about the Bulls season, where they kind of go from here going into the offseason and beyond. But where I wanted to start is with the trade deadline and kind of tie that into Artūras' comments a few hours after the deadline. 28 teams made some sort of moves leading up to the deadline. Some made moves a lot earlier than others, but one of those teams, one of the two teams that stood pat was obviously the Chicago Bulls. Now, I'm sure, the fan base, as you know, wasn't too pleased with this decision. Really, we've noticed from the beginning of the season, this team has to do something, like even if it's just minor moves to improve on the margins. The roster is currently constructed does not work. I know you've been reporting leading up to the deadline. All signs were indicating that the Bulls were likely going to be quiet at the deadline. But even despite that, knowing what we have seen from this team, and still especially after witnessing that bad loss last night, which we can talk about, were you surprised at all that still not a single move was made?
Not really. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if margin move was made. I was pretty consistent with my reporting that I did not see them moving off any of the big three. And that's what happened. So, Artūras has been pretty consistent with this. He feels like he flipped the roster very aggressively and very abruptly over a short amount of time, and he wants to see it play some together. And unfortunately, that has not really happened, obviously, because of the Lonzo Ball situation. So that's a hole in the plan right there. And you nail it. I mean, we've seen a lot of inconsistent basketball this season. Artūras alluded to as much yesterday as well. But all indications that I was getting and my conversations with people around the league, because Artūras doesn't really offer beat writers much direction at all. So your MO is to work kind of outside in, and every team that I talked to kept saying, "No, Artūras is like saying that they're in the buy mode, they're not in the sell mode." So, and that's what he told us yesterday, that they're in the buy mode, right? So it didn't surprise me.
Well, I did want to ask you that because you mentioned, obviously AK mentioned in his press conference, they were buyers. They were taking calls, making calls. It's just there wasn't a deal out there that they felt was compelling enough to make a move. Artūras said, he was going to share, he wasn't going to share what kind of deals were potentially in the works. I think it was Sam Smith that asked that question. But what were you hearing on your side? What were some of the sources telling you as far as potentially deals that were discussed but just never went through?
I didn't get any specific names. I know that they were targeting what the obvious needs is. They need a true point guard to organize a team, which is amazing because they have so many guards on the roster. Goran Dragic to me is a very much a true point guard, but it's clear that they don't want to play him a lot of minutes. And shooting, and that's been borne out multiple times, including last night. With the difficulty from the 3-point line. So, at the end of the day, the reason why it's probably difficult for them to make a deal is if you're not putting any of your big three into play and you've already expended so much draft capital. I mean, if you look at most of the deals, the margin moves yesterday was all draft picks. I mean, there was 5 second-round draft picks being thrown around like it was candy, and Bulls have already played that hand. So, there are trade assets to me, and I made this point on our own podcast leading up to it, is that if you look at their roster, their trade assets are very difficult because they either have really big salaries or a lot of low salary guys. They don't have a lot of those mid salaries. They have them in Patrick Williams and Coby, And I think Coby would have been in play for the right deal, but he also represents, with Lonzo out, probably their best shooter, although he's been struggling from three of late. So that's kind of the bind they found themselves in. So I'm not sure, when he says he's a buyer, I'm not sure what he's selling, because if he's not selling the big three and you're not selling Caruso or Patrick Williams,
how can you be a buyer at that point?
yeah, it's hard to be a buyer. So
yeah. There was a rumor floating around, the Bulls and Knicks were engaged in talks regarding Zach LaVine. I believe the rumor package was something along the lines of like Evan Fournier, Derrick Rose, I think it was Obi Toppin, maybe Quentin Grimes or something like that, and then 3 first-round picks. Was there any truth to that at all, or just speculation? I know you didn't report on it, but I saw some other reporters were talking about that.
Well, that was a big enough story. I don't usually do this, but that was a big enough story that I did do some reporting, and I just laid out what I was able to find out.
Okay.
So what I was told, and all you can do is trust the people that you trust, is what I was told is there were no talks this week because the Knicks were focused on Anunoby. And what happened was, a while back, just kind of like a due diligence call, kicking the tires, the Knicks and Bulls had a short conversation where it was kind of like, hey, what would it take if you were to sell, what would it take to get Levine? And I'm not sure it went past much more than that. Now, I know we're going to get into this, but what I read from Artūras' comments was, okay, so the price was too high at the trade deadline, but we need to make some changes. So that certainly leads to me to believe that they're going to be trying to do stuff in the offseason. And what I was told is that, the Knicks and Levine is something that could surface this offseason. But I know what I'm saying and reporting is contrary to other reports, but I was told there was, and I'm very comfortable with the people that told me, because it was from multiple sides of the issue, that there were no talks this week between the Bulls and the Knicks.
Got it. Okay. You kind of talked about, this intriguing offseason. You mentioned that in your column as well. Even, AK, I mean, without directly saying it, like you said, you could conclude that he is going to be revisiting all these potential opportunities that they had talked about at the deadline in the offseason, where it be potentially free agency as well. 4 guys in particular for the Bulls who are going to be free agents, both restricted and unrestricted. But you called out an important thing in the press conference, which, by the way, I saw a lot of the fan base praising you for grilling and asking these tough questions.
For doing my job.
You're just doing your job. But no, because I feel like sometimes, reporters, they might not want to rock the boat a bit. And you did. And I think it was important given the state of, where this franchise is right now. But you called out this franchise not be wanting or not being willing to pay into the luxury tax. And they don't, right? Now, we can talk about that as a separate issue. But given the limited cap flexibility, the big contracts that they have with their core guys and limited draft capital they have as well, what moves can they truly make to this roster if they're unwilling to go into the luxury tax? And I know AK said, well, we did it before. We did it in 2021. A lot of people said we weren't going to be able to make the moves that we could for, Demar, Lonzo, they did sign and trades, things like that. But realistically speaking, I mean, in your view, what are some of these moves that they could potentially make in the offseason?
Well, I read it, and there's just my interpretation and my speculation is I read it as they're going to be moving off one of the big 3, even though they said they weren't doing that leading up to the deadline. That's the way I read it, because that's the only way to me you can get that done, right, unless you pull off something creative and unforeseen like they did in the summer of, I guess that would be 21, when they, it's funny because if you remember that summer, remember how we were like all speculating, the partial guarantees on Thad Young and Tomas Satoransky, how are they going to play those? Are the Bulls going to operate as a over the cap team or an under the cap team? And then boom, they just came in with this, plan that like completely caught everyone off guard. And that's what Artūras was alluding to last night. So maybe they have something similarly creative that I don't see on the table, or in their plans, or in their ideas, or in their vision, or their philosophy moving forward. But the simplest way to reset to me is to pivot off one of the big 3. And I think there's enough body of evidence now that there's whether or not it's a failure or they don't work or however you want to classify it. I would probably just say my phrase would be like, there's probably a ceiling to what these 3 can do together. Right. And so you cash in one of them and see what you get back, and you keep two of them, and then you kind of rearrange things that way. That's where my instincts are going to be following as we enter the offseason as a beat writer. That's kind of where my initial instincts and focus will be, but we'll see where it goes.
And do you think, of the big three, if they were to move off from one, if I'm kind of reading the direction you're going in, I imagine it's going to be a choice between Demar and Zach.
Yeah, that's a great call, because I would say that, first of all, now the tricky thing of that is that, if you let Vooch get to unrestricted free agency, it's not all your choice. But I think now they're almost backed into a corner where they have to maybe overpay Vooch a little bit, just based on the simple fact of what they gave up to get him, right? Yeah. It's almost like a save face thing. And maybe that's not how this executives think. That maybe that's more like kind of fan speak or, armchair GM speak. I don't know, but given what they gave up to get him, and given that he's played very well and hit, and what Artūras said last night about their confidence in re-signing him, I check Vooch as back. And so, yes, my speculation and my instincts are going to be watching what they do with Demar and Zach this offseason.
Now, clarify for me, they can still offer Vooch an extension, say today, right? There's no.
While we're taping this podcast, they could extend them.
What's that?
While we're taping this podcast, they could extend them.
Okay. So they can do it at any time. So it's possible he might not even hit unrestricted free agency.
Well, and from my seat, it makes sense that the Bulls take care of that before July 1st. So it doesn't even get to that. For sure. Because if you and that's what I mean. It's a needle that they need to thread, because you don't want to insult them with a lowball offer or with the wrong offer. But look, here's the other thing, man. I know Vooch has said to multiple writers, including myself, he likes in Chicago. He'd be open to an extension, blah, blah, blah. He also said to me earlier in the season, we were in Boston, I remember well, we were shooting around. He's like, I've made a lot of money in my career, and money's not going to be the only determining factor in this. It's going to be, my family's happiness, winning, my role. So
that's what I was going to ask, Casey, because we've gotten to a point where Vooch is still a good enough and productive player. Like you said, he's done well for himself in the NBA. I don't think money is going to be as much of a concern. Is he going to want to re-sign in Chicago? Diminished role, at least based on what he was doing in Orlando. The team hasn't played very well. You can tell sometimes he's a bit frustrated. I think that's always been my biggest question. Like I know you guys asked Artūras yesterday, how confident are you in being able to extend Vucevic? And he said, yeah, I'm pretty confident. And obviously maybe they're already having conversations behind the scenes, so we're just speculating here. But it's like, how do we know that Vooch actually wants to stay in Chicago?
Well, he said it to the Sun-Times, and he said it to me too. That he he's happy in Chicago. He loves his teammates. He'd like to be back. So he has said it, but those are just words, man. I always say,
and you don't know if that sentiment is going to change over the course of the season, especially if they miss the play-in. You know what I mean? Like,
there you go. So these, I'm telling you, man, he's going to be watching these next 27 games too, unless the Bulls, while we're taping this podcast, offer him, a 3 or 4 year full max, which I don't think they're going to do. But I'm just saying, like, maybe they make him an offer that he can't refuse. So the point is, it's a fluid situation. If you're asking me to predict, is Vooch back next year? I would lean towards yes, but it's never done until that contract is signed.
For sure. I did want to say, and maybe this will kind of be me ranting just a little bit, but it does come with a question at the end. One of the things that concerned me about Artūras' presser, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, is throughout the time you heard Artūras saying, he has full confidence in this group, how they felt that this was the right group to stick with for the remaining 28 games of the season, mentioned that he's seen some improvements from the roster, just need to see consistency. He talked about the lack of shooting and how, well, we're not shooting threes at a high rate, but we're making them. After watching that interview, again, I'm speaking as a passionate fan of this team. You can't sit here and tell me that this team has seen improvements from last year. You can't sit there and tell me that you have confidence in this group based on what we've seen in 50 plus games into the season. I don't know if it's just me being or not me. I don't know if it's just AK being in a state of denial or maybe just completely unaware of the reality of the situation. Like, I find it very hard to believe that he actually truly believes some of the comments he made last night. And if that is in fact the case, then I'm pretty amazed by the lack of accountability on his part for this roster construction. I'm not saying it's all in the front office. The players, the coaching staff, they have a piece of this as well. Even ownership is at fault, which maybe we can talk about that. But even just taking some ownership and accountability of this team isn't good. And part of that is on me. That's what I wanted to kind of see. And we didn't get that. What were your thoughts overall?
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I certainly get that, and I understand the frustration and the fan anger. I see a lot of it, in my world too, with emails and Twitter and stuff like that. I understand all that. I would just say this: like, I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen a lot of executives, not only that I've covered, but just being in a great sports town like Chicago, I've seen a lot of executives come and go, and all of them handle the media differently, right? So, on the one hand, I know some fans feel insulted because they're like, how dare he insult our intelligence by saying that stuff. On the other hand, I'm like, what is he going to say? Like, he's going to come out and bury the players that, he has just now kept for the rest of the 27 games. What is that going to do for morale to appease the fan? Yeah. Now, the flip side of that is, and this is where I understand it, like I watched, I never met the man. I don't know him. I know people who covered him and know him. I watched Theo Epstein come in and incredibly transparently lay out their plan, how they're going to tear it down, how long they're going to be bad, how they're going to build it back up, how they're going to be a perennial World Series contender. And they did it, and he did it all along the way with accountability and transparency and honesty. So, there's an example of a guy who's, a masterclass with the media.
Sure.
I know Artūras. I talk to him away from the microphones and stuff. He's not a dumb guy. I know some fans think that he is now. And
no.
What he said last night, and that he insulted their intelligence. He is. He also said things like mediocrity is not acceptable, and I'm disappointed with our inconsistency. So
sure.
It's not like he's not watching the games, but. He tried to make moves. They didn't happen. So this is his team. He's not going to bury his team publicly now. He's going to give a vote of confidence. And then I think he's going to address things this offseason.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. I mean, the fact of the matter is, once the trade deadline is passed, this is going to be the group. And sure, you don't really gain a lot of benefit from just saying like, yeah, I'm disappointed. Which I guess he kind of did say to an extent. I think for me, it was more about the accountability that, hey, I know this isn't working right now and we're going to fix it, which I actually think he has to an extent said on other interviews, maybe not last night in the press conference, which I mean is appreciated. But the one thing that I also wanted to ask you, as an armchair GM, do you think the Bulls should blow it up? Like, if you've been covering basketball for a very long time for a living, you played in college, you know the game well, and you can tell what works and what doesn't. Do you think the extreme approach should be taking and just starting over?
No. But one other thing about the press conference, like I'm also not absolving them. I mean, there's definitely some comments where even I was like, if we had just won that last game, we'd be in 8th place. And, and the 3-point rate question, I mean, everyone's seen that it's hard for them to win in today's modern NBA with their approach because they just don't have enough shooting. But that's
well, and it was ironic too. He said, "Well, at least we're making them," and then they followed up with the game against the Nets where they went, what was it, 5 for 27 last night or something like that. So yeah.
Right. Okay, as far as blowing it up, first of all, I'm a horrible armchair GM. I've told you that I'm awful at it. I have no desire to ever do it. I'm not. That's a realm of beat writing that it came in my career span, and I don't really have that muscle. I've never been good at it. But I would just say this: he just did that, and they're not doing it again. They're not trading all 3 of those guys and starting over. He just did that. He just blew up a youth movement because he was tired of watching Wendell Carter Jr. and Lauri Markkanen play basketball and wanted win now veterans. So that's not going to happen. And I personally don't think it should happen. I think you can reset this by trading Demar or Zach. How that plays out or what shape that deal takes, I don't know, but that's probably what I would do. And I personally, I'm terrible at this. I probably would have traded Demar if there was a decent deal out there for him. I would have traded him by yesterday. And that's not a knock on Demar. I freaking love covering him. He's fantastic.
His value, his age, long term, how he fits.
Yeah, and I think you would have got the most return for him. Now, I don't maybe they did privately try to trade DeMar, even though teams were telling me that those guys weren't for sale. Maybe they kept one conversation under wraps on both sides, and maybe they didn't like the return. I don't know. What I do know is that's probably what I would have done. But that's why.
How credible were the Alex Caruso conversations? A lot of people were talking about how they had a asking price, so they were seeking 2 first-round picks, which is a lot for Caruso. Granted, if they were able to get 2 first-round picks, I think you should go for that. Was there truth to that, or that was just kind of like, I don't know.
Well, here's what I can tell you definitively, and then I'll get into the answer to your specific question. I know for a fact multiple teams called on Caruso. I was told upwards of like 8 to 10 teams called on
about Caruso,
and it makes total sense. I mean, the guy's a plug and play player for anybody. As far as specifically, I know somebody else reported 2 first-round picks. I never heard that. My reaction to that would be, that's just negotiation. They set the price here. And if they were serious about moving Caruso or wanted to move Caruso, they probably would have lowered that and taken a pick and a player. But I was never given the impression I wrote this. I don't think they ever seriously entertained the idea of trading Alex Caruso.
Yeah, and that was on some of my videos when I was talking about that, because I think people started getting up in arms like, why would you trade Caruso? He's one of your best defenders. He's so valuable to the team. And it's like, look, I think every player has a price. You set the price really high, say like, we don't want to trade this guy, but hey, if you're willing to give us X, in this case, 2 first-round picks, sure, then we'll have a conversation. The other report that I want to talk about really quickly, I think it actually came out from David Kaplan. Again, I don't know how credible this is, but there was a thought, or it was said that in the locker room, the relationship between Zach LaVine and Billy Donovan has sailed, and that the rest of the locker room is on Billy's side. Any truth to that, or have you noticed anything on your end when you're in the locker room, interviewing these guys?
Well, I've been very consistent. I don't comment on other people's reporting, so that whatever reported is his deal. So I'll just say this: I've been very consistent with my reporting, and I talked about it very strong on the Bulls Talk podcast. That from that benching on, Zach's never gotten over that benching, and I don't think he ever will. This is not like, I'm not even like sourcing this out. You could see it in his comments to us.
Yeah.
He told us he went and talked to Billy. That one really stung him. So, he's a professional guy. Billy Donovan's an incredibly professional coach. I don't see day-to-day like anger or hostility. But I do know that benching stung Zach deeply. And I reported this at the time. I think some other people did as well. He was questioning his role, at times, because especially early when he was not really in his normal form, he didn't feel like he was being utilized the same way as he had in the past in this equal opportunity offense, and DeMar, kind of getting more of the spotlight and things like that. So he questioned his role at times too. Now, again, I think most of that stuff is smoothed over to the point, not like where it's forgotten, but it's like it's not like a unworkable relationship. I mean, they're professional on a day-to-day basis. So,
do you think that Zach's role in general? Do you think that that's impacted his overall performance in terms of I know that he has had the injury concerns. He had a slow start to the year because of the initial injury that he had, or he was coming back from an injury. But at least from it kind of getting to him mentally, knowing that, hey, I just got a max contract. I'm supposed to be the franchise cornerstone. DeMar's getting, majority of the touches. He always gets the last shot, generally speaking. Do you think that's kind of impacting why we're seeing sort of this dip in performance from Zach?
I mean, it's a fair question. I don't know. My opinion on it is maybe. I would say that Zach, to me, over the last couple of months, has played pretty well overall offensively, except with his decision making and his late turnovers. So those are really, he has regressed in that department from my perspective, and that's a disappointment if you're a Bulls fan or a Bulls employee citing his paycheck.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of that's kind of what I was getting at. It's like, is that affecting his decision making because maybe he's trying to do too much or he's overthinking things, right? It's like things change sometimes once a player gets signed to a very big contract, right?
Yeah, he's always downplayed that, and I believe that part of him. He's big enough boy and accepts the responsibility of that. But he's never Max to him means nothing. It's just a label that media uses. Okay, but I don't know exactly what the answer is in terms of it, but it's just we all see it. I mean, there was an ascension that Zach was on with that first All-Star berth, Olympic selection, second All-Star berth, and then he got the knee injury. Obviously, that affected him down the stretch of last season. And then this season, he started slowly, and now he's rounding into form. But he just hasn't been on that same ascension. To me, he was on an all-NBA path. And I haven't seen that as much this season. Now, to his credit, he is playing through, 2 injuries. I mean, the thing on his hand, he doesn't talk about it much, but I know it's affected him at times. And, he came back from that knee surgery when he wasn't 100% right. And he was trying to play those back-to-backs. They wouldn't let him. So he's always played through stuff. I don't know if that's an element to it too. But there's just times where Zach's IQ and decision-making are called into question too often. There's just no sugarcoating that.
Yeah. Mandatory Lonzo Ball question. Obviously you asked, AK, any update on Lonzo? And he said, I don't know, but we'll have something to share after the All-Star break. What do you think that's going to be? There's a lot of speculation that just means they're going to shut him down for the season.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I'm not saying it's 100%, but at this point, the surprise would be if he plays this season, Now, LeVar Ball just went on Stacey King's podcast and said, even if it's 2 games, it's important for him to get out there. So look, Lonzo has a seat at the table too. His doctors have a seat at the table. His camp has a seat at the table. Maybe something as small as salvage, but at this point, the expectation for those of us who are on the beat is that he's going to be declared done for the season, which is just astonishing. It really is. And I'm not astonishing like on a how can he sit out a whole season thing. It's his body. I'm just saying it's astonishing just on a level that a guy who's so young and so joyful and so impactful is going to go. What would that be? January to October is 21 months without playing basketball. Holy cow.
Well,
it's like the Bulls are living Derrick Rose all over again.
I was just going to ask the question. I mean, do we think that Lonzo is going to be the same player even when he does come back? Maybe we're scarred as a fan base because we had this hope that Derrick Rose was going to return to this MVP form, and obviously never did. Can we expect Lonzo to be the same type of player after missing so much basketball?
Very fair question. And, obviously you're going to get canned answers now. Not even in a bad way. Lonzo's great in the media, but I asked him directly when we were in Paris, do you have any concerns about this being career threatening? And he downplayed it, of course.
Right.
And I keep hearing that most people don't think it is, but man, what's he going to look like? You're right. In October of 2023. I mean, that's a long time between games. So, it's just awful. Injuries are the worst, man. They are the worst.
And in a way, you almost kind of feel bad for not feel bad for Artūras. I guess what I'm trying to say is that their plan was completely derailed with everything that's happened with Lonzo Ball, right?
Yeah, I'll say this, man, because this will bring up Derek again now too, because I know the fans are angry at Garpax still for always saying, well, when Derek got hurt, I know that's a big thing on the beat. When Derek got hurt, hey man, if Kevin Durant got hurt, the Suns wouldn't be very good. Okay. It's like, I mean, I'm not comparing Lonzo Ball to MVP level Derek because he's not that, but he is an all-star role player. And you're right. On the one hand, why your vision shouldn't be so dependent on one player. On the other hand, that vision was working. I know where I'm covering no one around here, but you and I have talked about this before. Like those first 35, 40 games of last season, the United Center was electric again. It was incredible, man. And you can say they played a soft schedule and DeMar was playing out of his mind. Okay, that's all true. Yeah. But it was still electric.
It still happened. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Casey, I'll get you out of here on this one. 27 games left. How do you see the Bulls finishing out the season? Where do you see them finishing in the Eastern Conference?
I've got them as a let's see. I don't come out. I like to not change my predictions. I had them 44 wins going into the season, so 26-29. They got to go. This is not looking good.
No.
They've got 27 games left. They've got to go 18-9. Yeah, that's not going to happen. All right. So I'm going to come off that prediction, and I'm now going to predict them. I think they're a play-in team, but I do not think they are a playoff team. So I think
So do you think they will not make it out of the play-in is what you're saying?
correct. I think they'll finish 9-10, and I don't know when they'll lose in that progression, but I don't see them ultimately getting to an 8-1 matchup in the playoffs. That's
unless Lonzo Ball is back, though. Then maybe they make it out.
Because I know you're joking about that, but like if we're wondering about expectations for October 2023, can you imagine if he came back? He'd be like on a 12-minute limit. And
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's I think it's hard to really predict where this team is going to finish because again, they have been inconsistent. They play well against good teams, bad against bad teams. It was the exact opposite of last year. So it's really hard to assess. I had projected them to win between 46 and 48 games prior to the season. I also thought Lonzo was going to be back. I mean, I knew that he wasn't going to start the season, but I was like, I bet, it seemed, at least at that time, they had talked about how we think we figured out what's causing him the pain.
Yeah.
4 to 6 week timeline, we'll reevaluate. And I'm like, okay, that's unfortunate. He's going to miss the beginning of the season. Margin for error in the Eastern Conference is going to be so slim, but he'll be back. So I figured they would at least do better than last season. I mean, Artūras himself said, hey, we're one improvement from last year. And so that's why I figured. But anyway, Casey, as always, appreciate you being so generous with your time. Keep up the great work at NBC Sports Chicago and best of luck to the rest of the season.
Thanks again for having me. Always appreciate it.